Si prega de essa un buen kit completo de mi Calamity Gundam. Si prega de essa un buen kit completo de mi Calamity Gundam. Hello everyone and welcome to the Gunpla Network. I'm the Spicer, who might also be dabbling in the dark arts, but today's review of the full mechanics Calamity Gundam comes to you courtesy of those fine folks over at Canadian Gundam. Canadian Gundam is your one-stop shop for all things Gunpla and Plamo, but not necessarily the dark arts. However, they do have a vast catalog that they restock regularly, a private warehouse option, and flat rate shipping to the US and Canada, and that's some kind of magic. When you're checking that vast catalog and placing your next order, don't forget to use the promo code Gunpla Network to save yourself 10% off. Well, the GAT-X131 Calamity Gundam isn't actually magic. It is part of the second generation trio of the Earth Alliance's GAT-100 series mobile suits from the second half of Gundam SEED. This, along with the Raider and the Forbidden Gundam, would be the main antagonist set of Gundams for the Freedom, the Justice, and the Three-Ship Alliance. This particular variant here in the Calamity Gundam focuses on long-range fire support with a bunch of big guns, but no melee weapons. If you'd like to know more about the lore of the Calamity Gundam, you can find that over on our 5-minute mecha episode covering this suit. As for the model kit itself, in terms of its visuals, it is phenomenal. The surface detailing is a lot to write home about. It's all over the place. It is master grade level in my opinion. Maybe not necessarily modern master grade, but master grade nonetheless, like in say the last 5 years. There aren't too many seamline issues, and a lot of them are played off as part separation, but there are a few nub mark issues that you'll most definitely be seeing, because, well, I clean up nubs about as well as, I guess, an average builder, because I'm not great at building. Anyway, that's beside the point, I suppose. The visuals are out-of-box amazing. Do a little bit of panel lining, it goes a long way to bring a lot of this detailing out. Everything is color separated in plastic, so there's no color separating stickers here, color correcting stickers, except for the foils for the eyes, the cameras, and then the scope on the bazooka. Everything is where it needs to be, in the color it needs to be, and is a little bit more stylized than we got with the high grade. Now, I will say, I don't really feel that it's fair to compare the high grade in this. Sure, the full mechanics is kind of just a big high grade in a way, and I'll kind of talk about maybe some discrepancies with that concept later. But, you know, the high grade is 10 years old. This is like 1 or 2 years old, and a much bigger scale, so it has a lot more surface detailing and more option for some stylization, especially since it's a little newer. However, I think the high grade still serves a purpose. If you are looking for a definitive version, visually speaking, of the Calamity Gundam, and price, space, or size are of no concern to you, then this is it. The full mechanics is phenomenal looking. However, I think the high grade still has some things to show us, and maybe I'll talk about it a little bit later and even maybe provide some photos as an idea of what I'm talking about. That being said, everything on the kit is really, really nice. Not just the main body. The cannons have all kinds of surface detailing that look pretty good without panel lining, but of course, throwing some panel lining on there is going to look great. The cannons even have little separated red parts inside, as that would be screen accurate. It's phenomenal. This is all about being visually stunning. Not necessarily mechanically stunning, but visually speaking, all of the surface detailing, all of the colored plastics, even some of the texturing, you don't really get to feel it, but the black vents on the chest actually have like different cut-ins and grooves in them. It's kind of hard to see because, you know, they're black and in the chest, so unless you blast them with light and overexpose everything else, it's kind of hard to see, but it is there and it's very cool looking. The cannons having the little red bits, the bazooka having the gray bit in the barrel, the shield guns having all of their distinct markings, which I didn't panel line, but they're there and you can see them, really just shows if you want something to be a really nice looking statue, you can 100% do it at a kind of master grade price point. And that's kind of something I'll maybe talk about towards the end of this review, is the weird place this sits in terms of comparison of a big high grade or a master grade. But everything is just beautiful looking. In terms of just the main body, as I said, all the surface detailing is great, but the head has its nice V-fin. It's proportional. The little antenna that stick off the side of the head don't feel too soft and rounded, but they're also not super pointy and sharp. The head sculpt has enough space for detailing on the face mask, which gives you a little bit of panel lining opportunity to make it pop out a little bit more. The shoulders will have all the rivets and dots along the green bits, with a couple of cut through spots for some gray pieces to show through in the upper, or the kind of basic upper shoulder, and then the far extended vents on the end. The little extra thrusters that stick down from the shoulders are a set of pieces. I think it's a total of 3 in there. They work really well, but they do have some nubs, so be a little bit careful when you're cutting those out. And you probably saw the nubs up there on the top of the shoulder and those green bits. The green does like to mark if you're not too careful with it. The arms have a decent amount of panel lining opportunity and have a surprising amount of actual parts. Not necessarily in the internal mechanisms for movement, but you do get 3 separate portions for the forearm that goes into the wrist. So you have a decent amount of part separation when you move it, but it does feel a little wobbly. As we move to the chest, you have probably the most diverse set of color distinctions there. You've got the dark hunter green, the gray, the orange, the kind of gloss black down under there for the vents. You have the little gray bit for the barrel in the middle of the red. It just meshes together beautifully. It's a little sharper and a little more down angled than the high grade, so it does come off a little more stylized as well. Moving down to the waist, it's kind of all of the same. The waist isn't actually where a lot of the cool stuff happens, but you do get the red jewel, the gray little bit that sticks out, and then that same kind of tealy green that goes around, and some gray thrusters on the sides and the back. Moving down the legs, we get more of that green teal color, but we get more orange on the front for some, I guess, thrusters or just knee pieces. There's a little cutout in there, so I'm not really sure if that's supposed to be a thruster or if that's literally just part of the knee. You do get the 2 hunter green pieces on either side that move down into the gray foot portion, and then the actual foot being that dark hunter green as well. A very nice combination of colors. I think these colors work a little bit better together than the high grade, but it's really not that different. So I think maybe it's the surface detail bringing more of it out, but it does feel a little bit more grounded and earthy versus the kind of poppy look of the high grade. Now, once we've got all of the visuals out of the way, how does it actually work? Well, it works kind of like a high grade, and this is where this kit, I wouldn't say falls short necessarily, but it does have a few issues, most notably in the shoulders, or I guess the bicep joint technically, and a little bit in the waist into the leg hip joint. It's not necessarily weak, but it does pose a few problems depending on what kind of surfacing you're on. So, before we get into actually how these things work and where my issues lie, let me actually tell you what it comes with, because that's pretty important too. You of course get the backpack, which is separatable and does look like it is kind of a striker pack peg. Now, I don't know if it works with any of the ale packs or any of that stuff, or if this would work with it, but it is kind of a flat peg, so maybe it would. It does stick out over kind of the shoulders, so I'm not really sure it's going to fit anything else, but it is there, and it's cool that maybe that option exists. But the cannons have a nice amount of surface detailing. They have the red in there. They are on not only a peg, so you move them forward and backward, but a swivel, so you can move them left to right. Allows a little bit more room for articulation that we'll see in a moment. But it's actually kind of a little bit impressive that they kind of thought maybe let's make the cannon swivel because, I mean, they could have just got away with a peg, but it is nice that they added that extra little bit. You also get to the shield that is a lot more textured than we got with the high grade. Everything is once again in plastic, so you get all the orange bits for the thrusters, and then you have the 2 gray cannons and the orange bit on the very end. The cannons have a bunch of nice detailing, and there's just a bunch of nice detailing on here in general. A little bit of panel lining will go a long way with this one as well. You'll also get the bazooka, which is probably the most boring of the accessories, but it still looks good. You do have the swiveling handle. You do have the gray bit for the barrel and the scope, and then you get the red metallic sticker for the, I guess, sensor of the scope. Tons more panel lining opportunity, which is kind of the name of the game with this kit. And you can swivel it on top of the shoulder or below it, but it does stick out pretty far in the back, so it runs into the backpack quite a bit. You'll also get a separate, just regular holding hand for the right hand, because you get a trigger finger for the right hand, so you have that option, but it doesn't have anything to hold, so kind of weird that it's here, but I think this is maybe just a leftover part. And then you get a stand adapter as well. You'll also get the big sheet of stickers here for the decals. I didn't use any of them, but this is what they all look like. So if you want to use them, you have that option, but I just haven't put them on to give the most out-of-box, kind of accurate mindless panel lining visual I can. Now, once you get it up on a stand, and that's kind of where I'd recommend you put it if you really want a dynamic pose, you have a fair amount of options. The bazooka is a little difficult to move around just because of how bulky it is and how bulky the backpack is, but you can get some pretty good poses over the shoulder. You do kind of rely on the backpack, the cannon, and the V-fin to hold it in place sometimes, but regardless, it still doesn't look too bad. You can get it kind of looking down the sight of it, and it is a pretty big piece of plastic, or several pieces of plastic, so it does have a pretty imposing feel being used, and the different colors of gray do help it stand out a little bit more than it would otherwise. You can also bring that down under the shoulder and use the shield if you would like. The shield's cannons are independently articulated, so you can move them pretty much wherever you want. They're effectively a ball joint in there, so you can move them left, right, up, down technically, and just pretty much anywhere you want. There is a adapter on the back of the arm as well as a handle. The handle's a little bit more for show, but it is nice to be able to put it in there in case you're trying to go for a stabbing pose with the shield. And then the cannons, once again, just kind of move those out of the way for the bazooka. That's really where all the articulation comes in handy with those, because you need it a lot with that bazooka. You can also use the chest cannon, but it doesn't look quite right in this. It could just be the pose I've chosen. It's not ideal, but I think that a little bit of that stylization does hamper its posability here. But regardless, you can use it if you want, and having that specific red plastic in there does help kind of bring attention to it, to be like, hey, this isn't just some weird pose, he's shooting a cannon out of his chest. And then if you want to bring the cannons forward and make them the main show for your display, you can absolutely do so. Not only does the cannon articulation help this to bring him over the shoulder, you do get a really nice ab crunch to make it look like he's hunched over to fire them as well. Moving cannons is pretty easy, especially when you've got the bazooka down under the arm, gets it out of the way, and when you're bringing these forward, there's no issue with collisions. The shield does bump into the little extra shoulder thruster that hangs down, but it's not too hard to move out of the way, just kind of something to note. Now, if you want to kind of go full burst, you can do that as well. A little harder of an effect to sell, but you can absolutely do it. It's still not as impressive as just the cannons being brought forward, in my opinion. Now, you can actually do a lot of that posing on the ground as well. And this is where I'll kind of start talking about the issues I have with the high-gradeness of this. The weight of the backpack, which isn't actually as heavy as you would think, is still heavy enough to put enough weight down onto the torso, down onto the waist, and down onto the hips, which have a swinging mechanism to where if you put them on a glass surface like this, they're going to want to push down. Now, it's not as bad as a master grade because, well, there's not as much there, but it still does try to push it out of this pose on a glass surface. If you don't have a glass cabinet, you're probably not going to have to worry about this, but just keep a note, if you've got a very slick surface that the feet aren't going to get a lot of grip on, they're probably not going to hold very well in more spread out poses like this. Now, I would say that this being able to do this is actually really amazing. Having the ab crunch, having those cannons brought forward, and having the ability to move that leg out with the swing joint really helps sell that this guy's trying to fire a cannon. And that was a kind of a complaint I had with the high grade is for long range suits like this, unless the cannons have their own specific gimmick, it's hard to really sell a dynamic pose with cannons because you don't usually get effect pieces for them. Here it does help do that a little bit. So that articulation does come in handy, but it does kind of come at a cost in certain circumstances. Now I will also say that the arms are just on a little peg like they would be with a high grade, so they will fall off a lot, which isn't awful because they're pretty easy to put back on, but it can be a little frustrating if you're trying to move it around a lot, especially with that bazooka, because the bazooka is going to bump into something, and the more it bumps in, the looser that arm gets, and then it eventually will fall off. Now, I'm not lost or broken anything on this, so I'm at least doing better than I did with the high grade, but it is still something to take note of. The arms will fall off, most likely. Your legs will probably move, and then maybe your torso is going to wobble a little bit depending on what pose you're in. But those are really my big complaints. Overall, I don't really have too many concerns with it. It's just kind of the nature of the beast in this instance of the engineering behind it. Now here we have it with the Master Grade Freedom 2.0. It's kind of arch enemy, if you will, from the series, and they look really great together. As I said, in terms of pure visual aesthetic, especially once the stickers are on or you get some dry transfers or wet transfers, this thing will be near indistinguishable from a Master Grade. The surface detailing's there, the proportioning is there. It's a little stylized, but not overly so like the Freedom. But really, these look great next to each other. So if you're maybe wanting a Master Grade but not wanting to go too crazy, this is kind of right up your alley. Now that being said, this effectively runs the price of a reasonable regular release Master Grade at kind of its initial regular availability. Some Master Grades have gone crazy just because maybe they're hard to find, and then there's P Bandai and all that, but regular release Master Grade, it's around the same ballpark in price, and it looks like a Master Grade, but it doesn't really function like one. So that is kind of where I'll put those thoughts, but as far as kind of this weird situation with this in Master Grades. But I will say, much like I said at the beginning of this, if you are a Calamity Gundam fan or you like this design, the surface detailing, all of that, this is the definitive version for you if price, space, and scale are of no concern to you. As I said, this is about the price of a Master Grade. So if you really want something that's more engineered, maybe a Master Grade's the way to go. But if you like the Calamity, this is a fairly easy, quick build. It's pretty impressive looking right out of the box. And you like the Calamity, so it's a kind of a no-brainer. This is a must-buy for Calamity and SEED fans. But if you want a Master Grade and you're willing to spend that, another Master Grade, or actually a real Master Grade, is probably your way to go. But overall, I'm really pleased with this. Sure, maybe it is a little pricey for what it is, but I think that Bandai has taken this line in a really good direction, once again blurring the line between full mechanics and Master Grade, kind of like the Moon Gundam got a little close to blurring the line between high grade and real grade. It's not overly engineered, but it does visually out of box come close to looking like a Master Grade, save maybe some of the nub marks and part separation. Overall, I like this kit. It's a must buy if you're a SEED fan. I really can't say that enough. It looks amazing. But if you're not a SEED fan necessarily, or you're kind of middling on it and this isn't a suit you really like the design of, absolutely you're not missing out on too much. And if you want to wait for the Raider Gundam or go with a different master grade from SEED, that is a solid option as well. But if you have any questions, pop them down in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them. And as far as the comments I made about the high grade serving a purpose, I'll put some pictures here so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. And, we'll see how far I get into finishing this little project. But I still think you have some validity out of a 10-year-old high grade as well. Anyway, I've been the Spicer here for the Gunpla Network. Please do your best to stay safe and keep on building.